Okay, so I've been wanting to do another video for a while on this channel and haven't been able to find motivation. But then yesterday I watched Zuckerberg testify in front of Congress, and I thought it was so funny that it merited a video, and it got me motivated enough to actually make this. So if you're not familiar, Facebook has been under a lot of attack for issues relating to Cambridge Analytica and obviously the Russian meddling in the US election and just other issues with privacy. And so Congress held a hearing for him to answer questions about how Facebook deals with those issues. And when he first came in, he looked quite stressed. He doesn't usually find himself in these kind of situations, and he had like these bags under his eyes, and I was like, oh, poor Mark. He looked so just stressed and uncomfortable. And then the hearing started, and the level of incompetency that was of these senators that was demonstrated throughout this hearing was hilarious. They have no idea how Facebook works. They sounded like if a teacher told their students to prepare 5 questions about a reading and to come into class tomorrow ready to present those questions, and that's exactly how they sounded. And like the kids just didn't like actually pay attention to the reading, and they just winged it the night before. That's exactly what happened. And Zuckerberg was just like, oh, that's it. Zuckerberg was like, oh, this is it? You're gonna ask me how Facebook makes money? Literally, one of the senators asked Facebook how they're running their business model if they're not charging their users. And Zuckerberg just looked at him and paused for a few seconds, like, is that actually his question? And then I was like, Senator, we run ads. And that was the first time he smiled in the hearing, and it was so funny. And the senator was just looking at him like, oh, yeah. Right. He had to repeat himself multiple times, explain to these senators that Facebook does not sell user data. And I think a lot of people in general have that misconception. They think that Facebook takes your information, just sells it off to people. Like, Joe Schmo comes to Facebook's like, hey, I'll pay you $2 million for this much information about these people, and they just give it over. That's not how it works. They don't do that. And just to explain to anyone who didn't watch those hearings and doesn't know the answer to that, basically what I understood from Zuckerberg is that Facebook will allow advertisers to target certain categories of people, but they don't give over that data to them. So for example, someone's running an ad for soccer camp. They'll have a category they'll have data about who follows soccer or is interested in soccer, and they'll allow them to target those people and have those ads show up for those people. But they don't just sell the information like, oh, here's the phone numbers of all the people who play soccer or like soccer. And so that's not how it works. And he had to repeat himself so many times throughout that hearing. And to me, it's like, well, if you're going to call this guy in to testify, you should know the answer to basic questions like that. Like, how do they make money? Like, what kind of data do they collect, stuff like that. Like, this is the kind of information that you can find online. And for a senator to just simply ask him that, I thought it was just a waste of time for everybody. It was a waste of time for listeners, for the media, for Zuckerberg. I mean, what that testimony really demonstrated to me is that our politicians, first of all, our politicians are clearly not very familiar with common technology, and that is a symptom of the fact that most politicians are quite old, especially in the United States when it comes to the Senate and stuff like that, and Congress. And I think that is really concerning, because you cannot have I think politicians should represent all people in society, and they clearly don't. They come from an older demographic, and that's a problem, because a lot of issues that affect younger people like myself, obviously, is not something that they would be familiar with or concerned with to the same degree as I would be, or someone my age would be. And so I think that's, first of all, a very big problem, and I think that's why it's really important for young people to be politically involved, and involved not just in the sense of like oh, I have a opinion. No, I mean like getting involved with campaigns, running. Honestly, like I think young people should be running for office. You don't have to be 60 to to be a politician, in my opinion. Um, and then second of all, what this demonstrated was that politicians don't do their homework. They just like, for me, if I were a politician and there was an issue in whatever industry and I wasn't really familiar with how things work there, I would call in a bunch of experts to brief me about it. I would talk to people. I would educate myself first before I try to confront that industry or propose legislation, because how are they going to bring in a bunch of bills about an issue they clearly do not understand? I think that's ridiculous. Like the whole point of this hearing was to determine whether the government needs to introduce legislation, regulation for the tech industry when it comes to social media. And to me, it's like, how am I going to trust you to make legislation when you literally don't even understand how Facebook works? So that is quite concerning. I mean, watching the hearing, there's no way you didn't end up sympathizing with Zuckerberg at the end and actually be like, hey, like what he's saying makes sense. You don't know what you're talking about. And so that's obvious. So this actually has ramifications for everything, because I mean, the fact that they didn't do their homework on something so basic like that tells me that why should I trust them about anything else? Do they know what they're talking about when it comes to economic policy? Do they know what they're talking about when it comes to the education system? I mean, are they really talking to experts, or are they just simply, taking on the taking on the same principles as their political party and political leaning, and just being like, oh, I'm anti-regulation, I'm pro-regulation, without actually knowing the substance of the issue? And I think that should concern a lot of people. Again, I'm not American, but I think, Facebook affects the whole world. And I mean, this is symbolic of how a lot of governments work and how a lot of politicians are like. Also, I think this also reflects how society is so manipulated by just buzzwords and sound bites. And so people are just like, obviously always like, they're concerned with their privacy and their rights and I don't know what. And it's just like, what do you mean by privacy? What is your concern? So there's all this hype about privacy and Facebook, and they have all your information, but do you really know what you're concerned about? I mean, if you're making a Facebook post, you should know that Facebook obviously is going to have that information. The system would not work if they did not save that. It just literally doesn't make sense for you to be concerned about that. And then it's like, okay, what else are you concerned? Oh, my ads are all about things that I have looked at, and that's weird. Okay, first of all, you could turn that off, and people don't obviously look into things like that, but there are settings to turn that off so that ads are not targeted based on your interests. Second of all, just why wouldn't you want them to be targeted based on your interests? Like, I mean, as a university student, I don't want to see an ad about mortgages and stuff like that don't relate to me. I'd rather see stuff about, I don't know, tutoring services for the subjects that I'm taking. Whatever it is, I think overall ad targeting makes sense. And if you don't like it, they give you the option to turn that off. I think that's pretty good. And so, I mean, there's just this sense of like entitlement, or it's just like my privacy, whatever, but people don't actually understand what that means. Like what is your privacy? What is it that you're concerned about? And people don't have answers to that. They just use buzzwords. And I think that politicians were just reflecting that general symptom in society, and they were just saying a bunch of buzzwords and like producing sound bites of like, we're concerned about the use of data. And it's like, okay, what is your concern? And they don't know. And that's basically what it is. And so I think people need to think about what they're worried about, and they first have to establish that, and then you have to see whether there is a reason to be afraid of that. And I don't know if this is what I'm saying is motivated by the fact that I'm not a paranoid person. I hate conspiracy theories. So I mean, I think you just have to be honest with yourself, and you have to educate yourself. And at the end of the day, I mean, you're responsible for what you do. If you make a Facebook account, you can go and find out what kind of information is being taken from you. And if you're not comfortable with that for whatever reason, I think that's weird for you to care. But anyways, if you're not comfortable with that, then don't make a Facebook app. Don't be online. That's your choice. You cannot expect, though, that that you could be online without information being saved about you, and second of all, being provided free service without them getting something out of you, and that being ad targeting or just ads in general. And I think it doesn't make sense. You cannot have it both ways. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens moving forward, whether they do actually regulate Facebook. And I think another interesting thing was that Zuckerberg was like, I don't mind regulation. It's not about whether there is or is not regulation, it's about what kind of regulation there is. And it was just funny because I think some of the Republicans were just like, no, we don't want to regulate you. And Zuckerberg's just like, I mean, I don't really think that there's anything wrong with regulating if it makes sense. And for them, it's just a matter of like principle of like, we hate regulation. And he's just kind of like, it sometimes makes sense, and that would kind of build a standard for the tech industry in general. And so we'd have to discuss what that regulation is going to be. And so I thought that was pretty entertaining. So I think the moral of the story is that be wary of your politicians because they don't know what they're talking about. So make sure that you stay on top of issues like this, and that you know what you want and you advocate for that, and that when you see incompetency like this, you call it out, and that you take that into consideration when you're voting. And then also when it comes to privacy issues, that if you're really concerned, make sure that you're doing your research, you're learning you're learning about what you're using and how data is being collected. If that concerns you, then just make a decision on whether you want to use that product or not. You cannot just complain without actually knowing what you're talking about. So I came out of this completely sympathizing with Zuckerberg. He ran laps around those senators, and I thought it was hilarious. Good on him. Also, for those of you who begrudge billionaires like him because they're just super rich, he created Facebook in his dorm room when he was 19. What did you do in your dorm room? Nothing. Probably nothing. You probably made memes and used Snapchat filters and did useless stuff. You probably couldn't even finish your homework. You provided society with nothing, really. Let's be honest, or something that's very minuscule, doesn't affect a lot of people, whereas he created something that affects now billions of people around the world. He dropped out of university to commit himself to this, and he was successful. And so for you to begrudge him for just being rich, you're just a sore loser. You want to make a lot of money, go be a genius like him. And I think that's kind of my attitude about this. I just hate it when people simply will be like, oh, this person made this much this year. Okay, but you have to look at how did they make that? Was it a fair way? And I think there are people like him and Bill Gates and others who are just absolute geniuses and outliers in society in the sense of how intelligent and innovative they are. And I think they deserve to make 100 times more money than other people. And whatever that number may be, if it's a fair way that they made that much money, then you know what? Good for them. If you want to be like them, then go be that smart and successful and be a risk taker and be innovative.